All right, Proverbs for Beginners, that's the name of the series, Practical Wisdom for the Everyday Life. This is lesson number 5 in the series. Today's lesson is entitled Wisdom for Relationships, Wealth, and Contentment. And we should cover chapters 26 to 31, Lord willing. A little bit of introduction and review before we get into today's material. In the previous lessons on Proverbs, we explored the foundational themes of wisdom as outlined in the book of Proverbs. The study emphasized the contrasts between righteousness and wickedness, highlighting the rewards of integrity, humility, and fearing the Lord. There were key practical applications that were drawn from topics such as the power of words, the value of diligence, and the destructive nature of foolish behavior. Through these lessons, we learned that wisdom is not merely an intellectual pursuit, it's just not head knowledge, but it's actually a call to live in alignment with God's principles, bringing stability, peace, and blessings into every area of life through the knowledge of God's wisdom. So today we're going to look at the theme of wisdom for relationships, and we begin with the idea of choosing wise companions. The idea of this theme and these proverbs is that the people we surround ourselves with have a profound influence on our character and our decisions. Proverbs emphasizes the importance of choosing relationships that actually encourage wisdom and integrity and growth while avoiding the negative influence of foolish and harmful companions. And so a couple of proverbs that address this issue. Proverbs 13:20 says, "One who walks with wise people will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." That proverb uses synthetic parallelism, and synthetic parallelism is when the second line expands on the first line. And so this verse teaches that wisdom is contagious when we surround ourselves with wise individuals. But foolishness is also contagious in its own way because it leads to consequences when we keep company with fools. Another proverb, Proverb 22, or chapter 22, 24 and 5 says, "Do not associate with a man given to anger, or go with a hot-tempered man, or you will learn his ways and find a snare for yourself." Again, this is synthetic parallelism, where the second line expands the first line. The insight here is that associating with angry or impulsive individuals can influence us negatively and lead us into conflict or trouble. Another proverb, Proverb 27:17 says, "Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another man." Here the technique used is emblematic parallelism. Emblematic parallelism is when the second line explains the previous line. Here, positive relationships refine and strengthen us, much like iron sharpening iron, highlighting the importance of accountability and encouragement in our friendships. So a couple of applications just from these proverbs. We need to evaluate our current relationships. Ask ourselves, are they leading us closer to God? Are they developing wisdom in us? Or are they pulling us away from these type of things? A practical step to take for our own lives is to identify one relationship that positively impacts our spiritual growth and nurture that relationship by investing intentional time in that connection. And there's that word intentional. We're going to use that quite often in our lesson series as we move on. Another theme is honoring parents and building a strong family. Proverbs highlights the importance of family relationships, emphasizing respect for parents, harmonious living, and wise discipline. These principles apply to both children and parents, offering guidance for fostering a strong and God-honoring family dynamic. A couple of scriptural reference. We begin with Proverbs 15:20. A wise son makes his father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. Antithetical parallelism, where the second line contrasts the first. The insight is this: the verse contrasts the joy that wise behavior brings to parents with the grief that brings to parents by a son or daughter who is acting foolishly. Another proverb, 20:20, he who curses his father or his mother, his lamp will go out in time of darkness. Synthetic parallelism, again, the second line expanding the first line. The insight here: respecting parents is foundational for a blessed life, and disrespect or dishonor leads to serious consequences in one's life. One more parable on this theme, or maybe two. The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother. Proverbs 29, verse 15. This is synthetic parallelism. It expands, the line expands the first line. And the idea here is that proper guidance and discipline are essential for nurturing wisdom and respect within the family. And another example of this, Proverbs 23:22, listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Synthetic parallelism expands. The insight: respect and care for parents are lifelong responsibilities that reflect the heart of wisdom. In other words, a wise person will continue to show honor and respect to his parents long after he is away from them and grown up. The application here for these particular proverbs: first, strive to honor your parents by speaking kindly, expressing gratitude, and showing respect regardless of your age. You never grow old enough to be disrespectful to your parents. For parents, the lesson is lead by example, modeling wisdom and godliness in your own behavior. I've often said children don't do what you say, they do what you do. They copy your behavior, not necessarily your words. And so a practical step that we can take: if you're a parent, create a plan to teach biblical values in your home. And if you're a child, take a moment to express appreciation for your parents through a call or a note or a kind word. Well, as we've done in previous lessons, I offer a couple of discussion questions that you might use if you're in a small group. And if you're watching this online or a video, you can pause at this point and discuss the question among yourselves, and then just come back to the video for the answer that I suggest to the question. So here's the first question: how can we foster wisdom in our relationships and families? The answer, one answer: fostering wisdom begins with prioritizing God's principles in all of our interactions. And so this involves choosing companions who encourage growth, honoring parents with respect and gratitude, and modeling love and patience and humility in family life. Now, practical ways to foster wisdom include consistent prayer for relationships, studying the Proverbs together as a family, and making intentional efforts to speak words of encouragement and truth. Another question: how does wisdom shape the way that we treat those closest to us? A possible answer: wisdom teaches us to treat others with kindness and patience and respect, recognizing the value of every relationship that we have. It helps us listen more carefully, respond with gentleness, and forgive quickly. By applying these principles, we reflect God's love, and we're able to build stronger, healthier connections with those who are around us. Again, some practical takeaways from the material we've just looked at. First, choose relationships wisely. Choose relationships wisely. Surround yourself with people who encourage and sharpen you spiritually. Avoid negative influences that lead to harmful behavior or attitudes. One way to do this is to write down 3 qualities that you value in a godly friend, and then actively seek out relationships that align with these qualities. In other words, know what you're looking for in a friend. Don't let developing friendships be some haphazard thing. Understand the type of person that you want to connect with as a friend and as a mentor or a confidant. Another takeaway, honor and invest in your own family. Family relationships are a priority in God's design. Whether you're a parent or a child or a sibling, make an effort to bring harmony and respect and love into your family dynamic. An action step in this area, set aside intentional, there's that word again, intentional time this week for a meaningful interaction with a family member, whether it's a heartfelt conversation or prayer, or even perhaps an act of service. These type of activities foster unity and love in a family, and you can be the one that initiates it. You don't have to be a parent to initiate a loving action. You can be a son, you can be a daughter, you can be the youngest child. Anyone in the family can initiate these good things to help build up your family. And then perhaps one more takeaway, apply wisdom daily. The idea of knowing and applying wisdom is not only when you're studying the book of Proverbs. I mean, we study the book of Proverbs to gain knowledge of God's wisdom and how to apply it, but we apply it in everyday life. So let the principles of Proverbs guide your words and actions and decisions. Treat every relationship as an opportunity to reflect God's wisdom and His love. Action step, memorize Proverbs 27 verse 17, for example. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And use this as a reminder to be a positive influence in all of your relationships. And so by embracing the wisdom of Proverbs in our relationships and our family life, we not only strengthen our connections with other people, but we also honor God in the way we live and in the way we love every single day. Another theme in Proverbs is the virtuous wife. A beautiful poem here at the very end of Proverbs, chapter 31, verses 10 to 31. And I'd like to do a little more exposition of this particular section of Proverbs. Its authorship and structure. The passage is attributed to King Lemuel, who recounts teachings given to him by his mother. While the identity of Lemuel is uncertain, this attribution suggests that these words come from a woman, offering a unique and insightful perspective on the qualities of a godly wife. So Lemuel is talking about what a godly wife looks like, but he tells us that he received this information from his mother. The section is written as an acrostic poem, with each verse beginning with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Remember, we talked about this previously, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Acrostic poems, each verse would begin with the successive letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And so this structure emphasizes completeness and serves as a mnemonic device aiding in the memorization and the teaching of qualities listed. And then there's the cultural context of this poem. In ancient Israel, the family was the cornerstone of society, and the role of the wife in managing the household, contributing economically and nurturing relationships was essential. The virtuous wife described in this passage reflects an ideal, and it encompasses wisdom, diligence, resourcefulness, and devotion to God. And so far from being a passive figure, as we often think of women in the Old Testament, the wife here portrayed is active, she's entrepreneurial, she's influential, and she challenges the notion of a limited or secondary role for women in ancient society. A little bit of exegesis for the poem itself. We'll read parts of it. The introduction in chapter 31, verses 10 to 12. An excellent wife who can find? For her worth is far above jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. A couple of insights just in these few verses. First, she's an excellent wife. Now the Hebrew phrase for excellent wife can also be translated as a woman of valor, emphasizing moral strength, capability, and integrity. He says she's worth above jewels. Her value is immeasurable, exceeding material wealth. This comparison underscores her unique contribution to the family and the community. She brings something to the table that no one else can, a very unique contribution that she makes. And then the third insight is trust and benefit. In other words, her husband's confidence in her reflects the mutual respect and trust foundational to their relationship. We move on to the next few verses. Verses 13 to 19 says, she looks for wool and flax and works with her hands in delight. She is like merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She rises also while it is still night. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She senses that her gain is good. Her lamp does not go out at night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands grasp the spindle. Again, a couple of insights from this short section. First, the virtuous wife is resourceful. She's diligent. She's proactive in managing her husband's needs. Also, the imagery of merchant ships that you asked about conveys her far-reaching efforts to provide for her family, symbolizing enterprise and careful stewardship. In other words, in a very practical sense, she doesn't just rely on the local market. She finds the things for her family that may come from far away. Today, perhaps, we'd use Amazon. She orders on Amazon for things that can't be obtained in the local area. She has that kind of initiative. We also see compassionate leadership in Proverbs 31, verses 20 to 21. It says, she extends her hand to the poor, and she stretches out her hands to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. A couple of insights from this passage. Her compassion extends beyond her household, demonstrating wisdom through generosity and care for the less fortunate. She takes care of her household. She takes care of business in her own household, but she has time and resources and energy to also reach out to those who are needy in her community as well. Also, her preparedness for the future. When they talk about winter clothing, her preparedness for the future highlights her foresight and her planning. She knows it gets cold. She knows the weather is changing. She knows that her household will need different type of clothing, and so she gears up for this eventual change. Verses 23 to 27 talks about her influence and her strength. It says, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them and supplies belts to the tradesmen. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Again, some insights based on this passage. Her diligence and character elevate her husband's reputation, showing the ripple effect of her virtues on the family's social standing. Not only the servants in the household, not only the children are fed and clothed and cared for, not only the poor and the needy in her family and in her community, but she also makes sure that her husband is well dressed. She makes sure that her husband has what he needs in order to carry out the responsibilities. The fact that he sits at the gate is a reference to his position in the community. In that society, the elders, the city council if you wish, the elders, the leaders would sit at the city gate in order to conduct a business or to make judgment on local disputes and other civil affairs. And so her husband was not shamed in any way by the way he dressed and by the way he was and the care that he had, because of the forethought of his wife. And then her wisdom and teaching reflect her active role as a mentor and a guide within her household and community. And then in the last few verses, he talks about her legacy and says, her children rise up and bless her, her husband also, and he praises her, saying, many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the product of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. And so key insights here once again. The praise that she receives from her family is the culmination of her hard work, her faithfulness, and her love. And then the final verses shift the focus from external accomplishments to her internal character. I repeat, the husband says, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord shall be praised. This links her value directly to her relationship with God, which shapes all of her actions. A beautiful poem, a beautiful ode, if you wish, to the woman of valor. I make a personal note. This is the passage of scripture that I read to my wife on the day of our wedding. And she has fulfilled all of these things and has become a woman of valor in our family as well. And so some applications here for this section. For the individuals who are already married, seek to model and encourage qualities of trust and diligence and faithfulness in your relationship. Reflect on Proverbs 31, 28 and 9 by taking time to intentionally, there's that word again, intentionally praise your spouse for the qualities and contributions that she is making to your family and to your wider family and to your community. Secondly, for those who are preparing for marriage, the poem suggests that we should focus on developing the inner qualities that Proverbs 31 highlights: wisdom, compassion, diligence, a relationship with God. A practical step here is to use Proverbs 31 as a guide to assess character and to prioritize spiritual depth over superficial traits. If the girl who's getting married and you ask her, so why this guy? Why are you marrying this guy? And she says, well, he's a good dancer. Or he and I, we love movies. Or he's interested in rock climbing, and I'm interested in rock climbing. And those are not bad things. That's good. That you have common interests is good. But if these are the only things that you see that draw you close to this person, you're not looking deeply enough. You're not looking deeply enough. What you want to know about a potential marriage partner, in my estimation, and as far as the scriptures are concerned, is this person honest? Does this person tell the truth all the time? Is this person loving? I mean, intentionally loving, going out of their way to show their love and their kindness to you. Of course, an important question for those of us who believe is, does this person love the Lord? Does this person know the Lord? Does this person know the Lord's word? Those are much more important questions to ask yourself when considering someone that you're attracted to. And that's fine if you're attracted to a person because of their looks and the sound of their voice and they're fun and they're funny, all good things. But if you're considering a marriage partner, then you have to look deeper. And that's the value of Proverbs. It helps you understand the deeper things. It helps you know what questions to ask and what characteristics to look for. Prudence, honesty, those type of things. And so a practical step is use Proverbs 31 as a guide to assess character and to prioritize spiritual depth over superficial traits. And then one more, for families and for communities. Recognize and celebrate the value of strong, God-honoring individuals in the family and in the broader community, especially women who add and who contribute to the marriage and to the church and to the community. Use the passage as a framework for discussion about roles and responsibilities in family life, ensuring that they reflect biblical values. You know, we know that God is the one who invented marriage. Not human beings did not invent marriage. God is the one who invented marriage. And so what God gives us as information about successful marriages in His Word, these are the things that we should use to estimate the value of the partner that we are about to choose. And so the woman described in Proverbs 31 is not a passive figure confined to the household, but actually a dynamic individual whose wisdom and diligence and godliness impact her family, her community, and society at large. Her value is grounded in her fear of the Lord, which inspires her actions and secures her legacy. And so this passage serves as both an ideal to strive for and a celebration of the transformative power of wisdom in relationships and in family life. And then another major theme that we look at in Proverbs is the theme of wealth and generosity and contentment. Money is a significant part of life, impacting our decisions and our relationships as well as our priorities. Proverbs provides timeless wisdom about wealth, teaching us to honor God with our resources and also to avoid the pitfalls of greed and embrace generosity and contentment. And so these lessons equip us to navigate a materialistic world with faithfulness and wisdom. We want to be faithful, we want to follow the Lord, we want to grow spiritually, but there's this thing called the world, the material world, the sinful world, the flesh that interferes with our desire to become men and women of God. And Proverbs helps us on a day-to-day basis interact with that world in a way that uses spiritual wisdom. So some themes and insights that Proverbs has concerning wealth and so on and so forth. So the first one would be honoring God with wealth. Proverbs teaches that wealth is not merely for personal gain, but should be used to honor God, reflecting gratitude and trust in Him as the ultimate provider. So we have a couple of scriptures here. Proverbs 3 verse 9 and 10 says, "Honor the Lord from your wealth and from the first of all your produce, so your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine." Here, synthetic parallelism where the second line expands the first line. The insight, honoring God with the first and best of what we have demonstrates trust in His provision and results in blessings. The imagery of barns filled with plenty and vats overflowing reflects abundance as a result of faithfulness. God blesses us because we are faithful. Proverbs 15:16 says, "Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and turmoil with it." Here, antithetical parallelism where the second line contrasts the first line. The insight, wealth is meaningless without reverence for God, emphasizing the priority of spiritual health over material gain. Some applications: dedicate the first portion of your income to God as an act of worship, such as giving to ministries that align with biblical values, or just your offering at church. The point is, dedicate the first portion to the Lord, and He will bless you with the use of the balance for yourself. A practical takeaway from this: do it purposefully. Review your budget and set aside a percentage of your income for God's work, making it a generous priority. I often teach in classes where we're talking about stewardship, for example, that giving the first portion means giving the first portion. You know, you get your paycheck, let's just say it's in the modern day, you get your paycheck, and the first number that appears is your gross, right? Your gross, that's before taxes and other deductions, your gross. Giving God the first portion means the first portion from your gross, not your net. You pay God before you pay the government. You pay God before you pay for your pension and your insurance. God is first. He gets the first portion, and then the government and all the other things. And the promise is, if you give God the first portion, He will enable you to live and do what you need to do with the rest of what you have. And so a practical takeaway, as I said, is do it purposefully. I see people in church sometimes, and the collection plate's going around, and somebody goes, "Oh, wait a minute, where's my wallet? What have I got here? Have I got a 20? That's not purposeful. That's at the last minute. Purposeful means I think about my offering. I think about the gift that I'm going to give to God. I review my own finances. I take the first portion. I mean, it's up to you. You get to decide. The instruction that you have from God is that you give Him the first portion, that you give it cheerfully, and that you be generous. Why? Because He's generous. That's why. Because in giving generously, you are giving like He gives. All right? Another theme in the money aspect in the book of Proverbs is the danger of greed and the love of money. Proverbs warns against greed and the excessive love of money, which can lead to selfishness, dishonesty, and spiritual emptiness. A couple of scriptures that talk about that. Proverbs 11:24 and 5 says the following: "There is one who scatters and yet increases all the more, and there is one who withholds what is justly due, and yet it results only in want. The generous man will be prosperous, and he who waters will himself be watered." Here, antithetical parallelism. In other words, there's a contrast. He shows the contrast between the generous man and the one who holds back. This verse highlights the paradox of generosity. Giving often results in greater blessings, while withholding leads to loss. People who withhold, they withhold thinking, well, I'll need enough for me. And those people who think like that never have enough. And the people who give generously always have enough for what they need. Proverbs 11:28 says, "He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like the green leaf." Here, antithetical parallelism, contrast between the first and the second line. The insight is this: trusting in wealth is futile, while righteousness leads to lasting success and growth, likened to a living tree, if you wish. One other proverb, Proverb 23, let me get that up, there we go. "Do not weary yourself to gain wealth. Cease from your consideration of it. When you set your eyes on it, it is gone. For wealth certainly makes itself wings like an eagle that flies toward the heavens. And so this is emblematic parallelism, where the successive lines explain more clearly the idea in the first line. The insight is that wealth is fleeting, and chasing it obsessively leads to exhaustion and disappointment. We see a little bit of this. There were a tremendous tragedy in the fires, the wildfires in California, where thousands of homes were burnt to the ground. And you read the stories about some of the unfortunate individuals who lost their homes, multi-million-dollar homes, who spent a lifetime building and fixing, and this was their main, this was their main savings, if you wish, their guarantee of wealth. They could always sell their house and walk away with a couple of $1 million, and then overnight their house was gone, completely annihilated. And unfortunately for them, even the insurance companies had bailed on them before the fires struck, and so they were there with a house that was ruined and no insurance. A large, beautiful home on the beach, knowing that its value is tremendous, and in one moment it is gone. That's why he says, your wealth just flies away. Well, that happens to a lot of people, not just through fires, but through bad investments and so on and so forth. And so trusting in wealth is futile. Trusting in it is futile, while righteousness leads to lasting success and growth, likened to a thriving tree. And it doesn't mean lasting success, you'll be rich, but successful living. In other words, living without fear, living with contentment, living with the knowledge that God will provide for us each day what it is that we need. A couple of applications from these passages. First, avoid prioritizing wealth and the accumulation of wealth over spiritual growth and relationships. Reflect on your motivations for pursuing financial gain. And then a practical takeaway, set boundaries on work hours and material pursuits, ensuring that they don't overtake your time with loved ones and your time with God. The pursuit of material wealth can be all-consuming if we are not careful. Well, one more theme here that deals with wealth in the book of Proverbs, and that is contentment, the blessing of generosity and contentment. And so Proverbs praises the blessings of generosity and the peace that comes from contentment, teaching that true wealth is found in a life that is centered on God. Some scriptural references, Proverbs 11:25, the generous man will be prosperous, and he who waters will himself be watered. Proverbs 11:25, synthetic parallelism, second line expanding the first line. The insight, generosity fosters reciprocal blessings, reflecting God's design for mutual care and provision. If you take care of others, others will take care of you. If you focus on meeting the needs of others, God will make sure that your needs are taken care of as well. Another proverb, 30 verses 7-9, 2 things I ask of you, do not refuse me before I die. Keep deception and lies from me, give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion, so that I will not be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? And that I will not become impoverished and steal and profane the name of my God. And so this prayer reflects the heart of contentment, seeking balance in material blessings in order to avoid 2 sins, one pride and the other the sin of stealing. The application, first of all, is to practice generosity by helping those in need through financial support and acts of service or sharing resources. We have been given so that we can give. If we're blessed with much, then we have the opportunity to do much. And that in itself is a blessing to us. A practical takeaway, pray and reflect on Proverbs chapters 37-9 by praying for contentment and a balanced perspective on wealth. Not something that we normally think about when we pray, right? When we pray, we ask, please God, help me with my sore back, and make sure that Johnny passes his exam, and keep my wife safe while she tries. Those are the type of everyday things that we ask for. And I'm not saying they're not good. Absolutely, bring all of our concerns before the Lord because He cares for us. But sometimes if we have a moment to pray and to focus, we ought to go a little bit deeper in the things that we ask God, and this is one of those issues. Why not pray for contentment? Dear Lord, help me to be content with what You've given me today. Help me to have a balanced perspective between work and family, and my spiritual life and my life of leisure. God wants us to have a balanced life, because a balanced life leads to contentment. All right, a couple of those questions, discussion questions now that you might want to use. First one, how do we balance stewardship, generosity, and contentment in a materialistic world? One possible answer, balancing these principles involves prioritizing God's values over societal pressures. Stewardship means managing resources wisely, recognizing that all we have is from God. Generosity flows from gratitude and faith, trusting that God will provide for our needs. And contentment requires focusing on eternal treasures rather than on temporary possessions. Another question up for discussion. How does generosity reflect God's character? Answer, generosity mirrors God's abundant grace and provision. Just as God gives freely to us, we are called to reflect His character by giving freely to others as well, fostering community and glorifying God through our resources. Some practical takeaways from this theme. First, honor God first. Dedicate the first portion of your income to God as an act of worship, trusting Him to meet your needs. The action step, begin by setting aside a percentage of your earnings for charitable giving or giving at the church. And I might suggest, try to increase that portion each year. God provides at every level. If you give, I'm just picking arbitrary numbers here, but if you decide, I'm going to give 5% of everything I earn to the Lord in various ways, a portion of it to the church, a portion to missions, and so on and so forth, good for you. At the end of the year, you'll be able to see how much, if you've reached that target, and if you have, I say up the level. Try 10%, try 15, try 20, 25. The thing that we will find when we do this, it's an old saying, but we cannot outgive God. The more we give in His service, the more He gives to us in order to continue serving Him and serving Him generously. A second takeaway, embrace generosity. Have you ever had that prayer? God, help me to be generous. Make out of me a generous soul. Look for ways to bless others through giving, whether financially or through acts of service. Identify one person or organization that you can support this week and take action. I mean, there are any number of ministries and good works that are going on that need support. The problem is not finding, the problem is usually with us, making the decision to say, I'm going to give to this, or I will help this particular ministry. And then if you do that, if you honor God first, if you embrace and cultivate generosity, well then you'll be able to cultivate contentment as well. Reflect on your relationship with money and practice gratitude for what you have. Spend time each day thanking God for His provision and praying for a heart that values eternal treasures over material wealth. By following the wisdom of Proverbs, we can use wealth as a tool to honor God, to bless others, and to live with peace and purpose in a world that often values material success above all else. And we're not looking for material success, we're looking for spiritual satisfaction. All right, well, no assignment. We've finished reading the book of Proverbs. I have a wrap-up lesson that we'll do next time we meet, so I look forward to that. I want to thank you for your attention, and we'll see you next time.